Determinism has a strong presence in theology, which is, I'm sure, much to the dismay to the adherents of scientific determinism. Theological determinism is a form of determinism which states that all events that happen are preordained or predestined to happen by God, or that they are destined to occur given God's omniscience. Scientific determinism isn't all that different. It just replaces the words omnipotent God with the words natural force. So the sentence becomes, scientific determinism is a form of determinism which states that all events that happen are preordained or predestined to happen by a natural force, or that they are destined to occur given the power of the natural force. God or natural force? Are not these concepts both equally vague and amorphous? It poses a serious problem. And the fact that neither science or religion can disambiguate the natural force or the supreme being, nor give evidence to the existence of any, doesn't help in the matter either. Theological determinism exists in a number of religions, including Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. It is also supported by proponents of classical pantheism, such as the Stoics and Spinoza. So there is a rich history of investment into this concept. All of this investment into theological determinism resting on an unfounded assumption about reality, that there is such a thing as a God. So right out of the box, the basic concept of determinism already stinks of religion before any secular implementations can even be applied, hence largely tarnishing most of determinism's potential positive utility by the mere association. And so what about free will? Free will is alluded to occasionally in some of the scriptures, and often used as a buzzword in the proselytization rhetoric of the religious ilk. So isn't this indicative that free will plays some role in the narrative about God? Yeah, sure, but it's a weak association, as it doesn't even make sense in any etymological context. The only reason free will is entertained in theism is so that the religious ilk have an excuse to partake in their favorite pastime, judging and condemning people, which they do with so much pride and fervor, feeling righteous and dignified as they arrogantly assume the justification to impose an invasive guilt trip upon you. But according to their own religions, they don't even have that right, as the fate of man is in God's hands alone. And according to the scriptures, man is not saved due to the merit of his choices or actions, but saved only according to God's grace, which basically means God will save you according to his momentary mood or whim. That's the first reason why free will doesn't gel with religion. No matter how you might exercise your free will, none of it will curry you any favor with God. The second reason why free will doesn't gel with religion is due to the fact that God's very existence destroys all possibility of free will. Because God is omniscient and omnipotent, everything that happens is, for all intents and purposes, already determined. For God knows everything in advance before it happens. Yet, despite this, Theologians insist that somehow God has given us free will to choose how to act. Sound contradictory? Of course it does, because it is. Yet, no rational, satisfactory explanation will ever be provided to account for this discrepancy. And it's no real surprise, as if religion has shown us anything, it's that the only consistency in their doctrines are the blatant inconsistencies. Why did God supposedly give us free will then? Wouldn't it have been easier and nicer just to create mankind as inherently good? Well, theists maintain that God's purpose with mankind is to have eternal fellowship with those who truly love Him. Therefore, to create us as inherently good robots without the potential for the opposite character, evil, would not allow for true love. For only love that comes from a free choice of the will is true love. Voluntary choice is the key. Love isn't genuine if there's no other option. Okay, well, whatever kind of love is being referenced to in this sick correspondence isn't anything resembling true love or free choice. At best, this is a selfishly driven illusion, contrived to validate God's ego. First off, according to this narrative, we are just a creation, which basically means we are glorified string puppets, which makes our existence nothing more than a divine masturbation tool. If God is omnipotent, then there really is no free will, as He is already aware of everything that is going to happen before it happens. So any choice that a string puppet may think it has is just an illusion. Not to mention that the love that God is said to want so badly, a genuine love chosen voluntarily, isn't even genuine, nor is it voluntary, as humans are not even genuinely existing independent units, as we are all but the byproducts of God's handiwork. It would be similar to a human being expecting genuine love chosen by free will from a programmed hologram or a machine. It ain't genuinely happening. We may program it to simulate such a chosen affection, but if we think that this programming represents any real authentic function, the only ones we are fooling is ourselves. And also, voluntary choice is the key, you say? Sounds good in theory. So it's too bad that God doesn't extend the same courtesy to His creations, no? I don't remember voluntary choosing to be thrust into existence by some monophobic deity with borderline personality simply because he has isolation issues.
Just make it. Did that thought ever cross your brain? Well, regardless, I would rather take my chance out there on the ocean than to stay here and die on this shithole island, spending the rest of my life talking to a goddamn volleyball! Wilson!
Yeah. So there is nothing chosen, voluntary, authentic, or free willish about any of this. But apparently, we are being asked to overlook these inconsistencies and are expected just to accept these insipid explanations at face value. The reasoning reminds me a lot of the rationale in a concept I like to refer to as special determinism, which is a variety of determinism often heard spoken about in certain philosophical circles here on the internet, wherein everything is already predetermined, yet, nevertheless, still affords an organism some type of a facsimile of a free will that isn't really a free will, but somehow enables the organism to be consequential in the equation of cause and effect by deciding to show up and go through the motions, which indirectly implies that there was some other kind of option in the first place, of which flagrantly contradicts the basic tenets of general determinism. They will cry and scream that there is no contradiction, but there are major contradictions. If you truly understand determinism and claim to speak for determinism, then words like decide, choose, and will should never even be coming out of your mouth, as any distinction of such an aspect would be, at best, illusory. And if illusory, there's no need to treat it as if it were any different than illusory. And saying that we still have to show up to go through the motions is buncombe. Nonsense talk with no point, as any possible point that could be proposed will be inconsequential, as the context of being affected to show up and go through the motions couldn't have gone any other way, as it is predetermined and predestined. Apparently, special determinism disagrees with this too. Another contradiction. Now claiming that the present moment is not yet written and only becomes written as it's being written in the present. Does this not sound to be an exercise of free will? If it's not already determined and destined to be, and only becomes so in the moment it occurs, this is the basic description of free will, which maintains that the will is free to make any new causes spontaneously, without being chained to one specific path by the oppression of previous endured effects. It's simple. Either you have authentic choice, or you don't. If you do, then there is an element of free will at play. If you don't, then any appearance of choice is illusion, in which case there's no point talking about it. And then they will say things like, there is such a thing as a will, but it isn't free. Or that it's just a desire with a different label. Also pointless gobbledygook. If we have a will, how isn't it free? Does it cost something to have a will? When was this paid? How is it paid? Or is this a reference to the lack of freedom that is inherent to the will? And what would this be based on, other than abstractions? This shouldn't be a complicated issue, but I think the main reason why these special determinists are talking out of both sides of their mouth and want it both ways is, as is the case with theological determinism, marking yet another similarity, because they do so enjoy being authoritative, and don't want the implications of determinism to strip them of their favorite pastime, judging and condemning people, which they do with so much pride and fervor, feeling righteous and dignified as they arrogantly assume the justification to impose an invasive guilt trip on you. So I think we can understand the motives behind the design of this position. It is derived from the desire to have a position that appears aligned to a very objective scientific methodology, yet still wants to leave room for all the touchy-feely subjective crap. And, of course, still leave tons of room for all the blaming, guilt, castigation, vitriol, and various methods of personal attack, so loved by the fans of this type of dishonest philosophy. And even without all this emotion trying to pass itself off as rationality, it's still an ill-conceived philosophy that, ironically, has some need to smear the idea of free will onto religious ideology, even though determinism is really the primary backbone of theology, despite theology's wishful thinking promotion of free will, all the while making constant reference to agency. Special determinism maintains hard determinism, all the while espousing rhetoric laced with appeals to free will, while theological determinism maintains free will, all the while espousing rhetoric laced with appeals to hard determinism. So there's a lot of convolution and faulty reasoning at play here, in both special determinism and theological determinism. But why is this so? The issue here is that both religion and special determinism want it both ways. They want to have their cakes and eat it too. They want the specter of some unknown, all-powerful force to be looming high over our heads, and claim that we are but a mere byproduct of such a force, and yet somehow assert that we still have some kind of loophole that allows us to be factors in some vague notion of a practical effectuation in the process. Most onlookers will focus on the similarities of these positions as they relate to the false misconception of free will. But this isn't the only thing they share in common. The most notable equivalence is that they both demand your subservience to a so-called external factor. And this is not by accident, not by coincidence, nor is an implication that should be taken lightly. As I have said many, many times before, when you attribute power and responsibility for your existence to an extrinsic factor, you strip yourself of all freedom and autonomy, hence casting yourself into mental slavery, just where they want you. So they don't mind if you believe in a fake notion of a will, or a misdirected notion of a will, as long as you never discover the truth of the actual will. For if you ever discover the truth of the actual will, then you will be out of reach of their influence. Hence, not in a position for them to impose dominance over you. And that's the only thing that power-hungry control freaks care about. Your acquiescence to their power and authority, by any means necessary.